Good morning, world changers. My name is Suzy Beaumont. I am a personal development consultant and founder of Change the World. And for today's podcast, I'm joined by the lovely Randi Fine. So Randi lives in South Florida and is a professional narcissistic abuse counsellor and also a survivor of narcissistic abuse herself. This is a subject that is very close to my own heart. Sadly, it's a subject close to my own heart after myself and my partner have found ourselves on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse ourselves for the last 4 years. Actually, my partner's been on the receiving end of it for much longer. But until we realised what we were dealing with and that we were dealing with a narcissist and started to understand the behaviour and how they think, we honestly thought we were going mad because their behaviour is crazy making, especially if you are a compassionate human being and you just cannot get your head around their actions and their lack of empathy. I also began realizing narcissists are everywhere. The more I learned about this subject, I started seeing how they were running our countries. I saw them in the workplaces where I was delivering training. I started to see them and recognize this happening with my clients within their family networks and their family dynamics. And I realized that actually I would like to start spreading some awareness around this subject. So that's how myself and Randi started working together. Randi has been a coach in our Change Your World Everyday coaching community. And now over the next 5 weeks, we are going to be doing a series of podcasts around the subject to help listeners identify narcissistic abuse so that you too can identify what's happening and how to heal from it. Now, some of the conversations we'll have over the course of the next few weeks may challenge you. It's a complex subject to get your head around, and it's difficult to comprehend how narcissists think and behave. So all we ask is that you come with this with a curious and open mind. And if you are suffering at the hands of a narcissist, Randi is available to help. And you can find out more information about her at randifine.com. You can also read Randi's book, Close Encounters of the Worst Kind, which I highly recommend. Even if you're just having confusing relationships, you don't think maybe you're not sure what narcissism is. If you find yourself having confusing relationships, either in the workplace, your family dynamics, and your romantic relationships, then maybe this book might actually provide some of the answers you're looking for. And it's a fantastic resource. So I do highly recommend it. But Randi, let's get started. I think welcome to the Change Your World podcast. It's lovely to have you here, and thank you for joining me from the lovely sunny Florida. It looks gorgeous out there.
That was a great intro. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, I think before we get into your story, I think we need to kind of, it's a huge subject, so we just need at this moment in time a kind of brief sort of definition of what narcissism is and what a narcissistic personality disorder or abuse might be, or is, I should say.
Of course, right, of course. And it is a big subject, but I'm going to touch on the highlights or lowlights about what you would notice in a narcissist. So first of all, when we talk about narcissism in this light, we are talking about narcissistic personality disorder, which is different than being a narcissist. But what happens is we use that word narcissist interchangeably because it's too hard to keep saying narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be a tongue tire and way too long. But the difference between someone who is narcissistic, and which this is something we all possess a degree of, okay? This is, this is something that infants come into the world with a tremendous amount of narcissism, and then they gradually die it down a little bit. But we're talking about a personality disorder. And the best way for me to illustrate how severe this personality disorder is, because the word narcissism does not conjure up the horror of what it truly is. So,
or the horror to be on the receiving end of it.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So narcissistic personality disorder is in a cluster of disorders defined in the manual, statistical manual, which
this is the DSM-5.
DSM-5, right? And it's in what's called a cluster B disorder. There's cluster A, B, C, D. Okay, but this is cluster B disorder, personality disorders, and in there, that's where antisocial personality disorder, and within that is psychopathy and sociopathy. Then you have narcissistic personality disorder, and you have borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. None of these exist exclusively. So somebody will be primarily one of them and have aspects of the other.
Which makes it so hard to actually diagnose the condition or any disorder, because if you're realms of different things, you know, anybody listening to this today will be like, oh, I know somebody like that, but they might be, you know, some of the other ones, the disorders that you've mentioned there.
It's true. And sociopathy and narcissistic personality disorder are very, very similar. So, and I bring that up because I want you to understand the severity of this disorder. It's not a little bit of, you know, looking in the mirror or a full-blown, you know, image of yourself. This is a personality disorder, which means that when you have a personality disorder, you are not aware, concerned with in the least your behavior. It does not bother you at all. So you can do whatever you want to do, as abusive, horrific as it is, and it doesn't bother you at all. That's what the personality disorder, and that's where it differs from just having a little bit of narcissism.
I just want to pick up on that point, because that's interesting. They're not concerned, they're not bothered by the abusive, evil behavior actions they take or thoughts that they have, but they must be aware of society's perception of this behavior, because we get overt and covert, and the abuse is always covert. It's always, you know, it's not there, you know, they're doing it either behind closed doors or when nobody's around, or and they can be extremely charming to other people. So they're very manipulative. So, you know, the person who's the target of the abuse can have this really horrible, horrendous experience, but everybody else can be, oh, you know, Joe's great, or, you know, Suzy's fantastic, or, you know, Claire, whatever, you know, whatever it might be, you know, they present very well. So they must know, you know, you're saying it's disordered and they don't care, but they must know it's not acceptable.
Yes, you're absolutely right. They know that they're different than other people, because this is something that forms in childhood or adolescence. And at the time, they develop what's called a false self. And this is when they lose their empathy and their capacity to love or feel any positive feelings inside. So they know that they're not feeling the way other people are feeling. They're not responding the way other people are responding, but they know that they have to fit in. And the reason they have to fit in is because the source of their every breath is narcissistic supply, which is adulation, admiration, and attention. And it's like a fish out of water. When they're out on the deck of the boat, they absolutely cannot survive. They must have this narcissistic supply at all times. And so they must solicit it, because they can't get any of these feelings from within. Everything with a narcissist comes externally. So they have to solicit these things. And when I say attention, it could be negative, it could be positive. It doesn't matter. As long as you're reacting to them, as long as they're soliciting some reaction from you, that is narcissistic supply. So in order to be able to do that, they have to pretend they're not who they are, because nobody's going to put up with the abuse that they're going to, the abusive behavior that they're going to use to solicit the supply. So they have to hide it. And so the narcissist does not have a self-identity. There is no one personality to a narcissist. A narcissist is a chameleon. And they become whatever they need to be to get what they need, which is narcissistic supply. And this means that with every kind of relationship they're in, and with each person they have some sort of relationship with, they're going to be completely different, because they morph into the character that best matches the person that they're trying to solicit the supply from. So they require an excessive amount of adulation, admiration, and attention. They're chameleons. They feel very entitled to be who they are. There's no embarrassment. There's no, they don't feel bad about having this full-blown entitlement. They have no sense of responsibility, and they never say they're sorry, because they don't ever think they are sorry. So if a narcissist may apologize, but the apology will always be on you. So in other words, it will be, I'm sorry you took it the wrong way. Not, I'm sorry that I said something that hurt you, but I'm sorry you took it the wrong way. So that's just a general example. So they're very, very good at using phrases and using words to confuse you and make you think that they're saying normal things. They have severe reactions to criticism. And criticism can be as full-blown as cursing them out, telling them they're wrong, or as mild as just saying, when you said that, that really hurt me, that really was not comfortable. Anything when you're saying that what they're doing is not 100% acceptable to you, that's when they will have these severe reactions. And sometimes they can be raging, loud raging, or sometimes they can be pernicious, which means that it will be the silent treatment, which for some, that's even worse.
Yeah.
And so that's basically, what you're going to see. But in any case, they are very charismatic, as you said, Suzy, and that's confusing, because what they do behind closed doors is not charismatic, but what they do when they first meet you is charismatic. That behavior is displayed initially. And then, as I said, so they have to have charisma outside of their inner circle, inner family, behind closed doors, because that's a different kind of solicitation. I
mean, there's so much I want to pick up on that. I want to unpick the narcissistic supply bit, because you've said about the 3 A's, the admiration, the adulation, and attention. So this phrase, narcissistic supply, that is all about them getting this attention. And you said that it doesn't matter if it's negative attention. So when you're talking about when you criticize them, that's obviously negative attention. It's the fear of exposing them. But, what is it that they get? I mean, when they get this attention or the admiration or the adulation, what is that? Just boosting the false self and reaffirming, oh yes, I'm great, I'm wonderful, all the entitled beliefs that they have.
Right. So the false self's job, when the child or the adolescent takes on the false self of narcissistic personality disorder, they do this because they loathe their life, they loathe who they are, and they want to deny that it exists. So the false self's job for the rest of their life, once they take it on, this is a suit of armor that cannot be penetrated. Once they take this on, the job of the false self is to never let the true self feel who they really are. So they have to solicit these things. And as I said a little bit earlier, the nature of the personality disorder is that they do not have the capacity to generate any positive feelings inside. They can't do it. You know, for us, it's natural. We can look at a flower, we can look at the sky or a rainbow, and we can be, you know, it can excite us. The narcissist cannot do that because the false self.
Anything, nothing at all.
No, they can't.
They experience no joy in their life at all.
No.
I mean, that's desperately sad.
It is.
It really is. I mean, it must be horrendous to feel that way. And
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm feeling almost compassionate, but then at the same time, being on the receiving end of a narcissist, you know, that compassion is running thin. But that must be, I mean, that's utterly miserable.
Well, it's miserable, but the narcissist does not suffer because it compensates by creating everything that bothers them, they attribute to someone else. So a narcissist would never feel that loss. They would feel that someone else is causing that in them, but they will never attribute it to themselves. So this is where all the blame and the shaming is. And so they have to, you know, because the false self is not a true person. Okay, this is not a humanly wired brain. This is a facade. So in other words, if you're having a relationship with a narcissist, you might as well be in a relationship with a virtual person that is just programmed.
Like a robot.
To say.
Like we're saying with artificial intelligence, you know, the way it's going.
Exactly. It's the same kind of thing. It doesn't go any deeper than that artificial intelligence because they're not really the person. So they have to solicit this, and they do it in different ways. So one of the major ways that they train us to give them supply is through our reactions. So this provocation, this pushing of buttons, this is to get us to react. This is to get us to cry. This is to get us to explain, to defend, all these kind of things. And then they're so happy because they're filled up. And we don't recognize this.
So actually, the only joy that they do get is actually when you're suffering and they're inflicting pain.
Yes.
Gosh.
And that's hard to wrap your head around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, you know, if you're someone who has empathy, and most of us, if we're listening, you have empathy, so you cannot imagine. But if you separate the true person from the false self of narcissistic personality disorder, then you understand you're not dealing with the true person ever. Ever. You're dealing with this creature, this thing that is predatory and parasitical.
Okay. We will talk more in the following podcast about how narcissism is formed and the maladaptive kind of actions and false self that is created. But, you know, this thing about empathy I want to explore, because I think that was one of the early warning signs that started. I mean, it was actually a friend who's a psychotherapist, and I was explaining to her what was going on, and she was like, she's either got a borderline personality, or she's a narcissist. And I was like, oh, you can't just throw labels around like that. And she was like, does she do this? Does she do that? Does she do that? You know, rattled up. And I went, yeah, all of those. And that sort of planted the seed. And we went down this sort of exploring it. But the one thing before we knew that this was going on, we kept saying, how we just couldn't comprehend the behavior because it was so alien for us to act like that. We were like, how could you be so cruel? How could you be so calculating? How could you not care? And so if anybody's listening to this and sort of thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm dealing with a narcissist, those, perhaps, I don't know, you can tell us, Randy, are they some of the early warning signs? If you're struggling to comprehend or see, because I feel I'm somebody that I'll always put myself in somebody else's shoes and think, okay, why is it they think like that? You know, and I'll question it and go, okay, well, let's look at it from their perspective. But always in this scenario, I was like, my head cannot compute this behavior, because nothing would ever put me and make me behave that, no matter how traumatized, how hurt I felt. You know, I might have these narcissistic thoughts, I might have thoughts of revenge, but I would never carry them out. And that's, I think, was the difference. It was just like they were carrying them out, and I was just like, this is just not normal behavior. And I kept saying that phrase. I'm like, this is just not normal. And using all my coaching techniques, you know, which usually work, you know, kind of to mediate with somebody to get, you know, it just weren't working. So is that, would you say, is the lack of empathy, is that the one of the major red flags to kind of watch out for, that might be an early warning sign?
Yes, it is. And you cannot pay attention to their words, because they're very good at disguising their words. They're very good at saying things. You know, if you started studying something at, say, age 18, and you're now maybe 35 or 40 years old, okay, how many years is that of studying something every single day? In every interaction you have? You become an expert, you become extremely proficient at it. So what narcissists have to do is they have to watch people. They learn behavior. It's not natural to them. They learn it. They learn what helps them to fit in. The thing about what you were saying is how we can't even wrap our heads around this. Narcissists know that we can't do that. Which is what they play upon. They know that we're different. They know that we feel things, and what's really interesting, they will always tell you who they are. They will throw in things throughout the time that you know them, maybe even in the first couple of interactions. They will always tell you who they are. But because it is so out of our realm of understanding, it just goes right over our heads. We don't even pick up on it, or we just go and we laugh about it because we can't believe that could be serious.
So what would be an example of them giving, you know, giving us the heads up of who they are?
So they may say something like, you know, I have a really hard time feeling love. And you may say, oh, well, maybe they just have been in some bad relationships. Or in our mind, we're going to say, you know, maybe they've gotten hurt, you know, maybe they've put up walls. This is how we're going to explain it. But if they say, I have a very hard time feeling love, they mean it. They can't feel it. They can't feel it. But we must try to rationalize that statement and fit it into our realm of understanding.
Of course, yeah.
And they will do this all along. They'll say, and the other thing they do, which is really interesting, is accusations are confessions. So they provoke you, and what they do, they will accuse you of things that are nothing you would ever do. I mean, you've been the most loyal partner to the narcissist, and you're being constantly accused of cheating on them. Well, when they accuse you of something like that, they're admitting to what they're doing.
And that was actually one of the second red flags, because we were in that situation. We were being accused of all kinds of things, and we're like, that's what you're doing. we're like, this is, and it was so bizarre, because it's like, well, gaslighting, that's another technique that they use, just completely going, you know, you provide evidence and they go, no, that didn't happen. You're like, there's the evidence, there's a video footage of you doing it, or whatever it might be. And they're like, no, didn't happen. Didn't happen. And it's, like I say, crazy making, because you're like, I don't know what to do with that. Anybody else who would, I don't want to use the word normal, but a non-narcissist would be embarrassed, would be shamed, would be, oh my God, you got me, you know, hold my hands up, you're exposed, or, you know, get angry. It's just like, no, didn't happen. And you're like, it did happen. And you end up being the crazy one, or sounding crazy, or looking crazy, trying to either defend yourself or convince others that it happened.
Right. Which is why you can never address them with anything that they ever do, because they will flip it around and project it, onto you and make you, anybody who's dealt with a narcissist, and this may be one of the things that you may notice, they will ask you a question or accuse you of something. You will defend yourself. They will play on something that you say and make you seem even more guilty. And then you begin to defend yourself even more. And before you know it, you've spiraled down into a conversation that you have lost. And where you have started, you may have started saying, it really hurts me when you do such and such. By the time they're done with you, you will be fully blamed for that.
Yeah, find yourself apologizing, and you're talking about something completely different, like way off the mark from where you started. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing that they're able to do, which is something we cannot do, is they're able to manufacture a plot, a plan that is going to go out hours, days, weeks, months, and years. And they do it within a second. We could sit down with a notebook and a paper, and we could try to figure out how to do one of these things, how to hurt somebody in this particular way, and we'd never figure it out. And the pathology of NPD is that they can do it in a second because it is survival for them. It's the way the brain works. Their brain works.
So they're extremely, I'm loath to say this because it's a compliment to them, but they're extremely clever. They're intelligent.
Very.
Yeah.
It's a brilliance that we never want to have.
Yeah. Or if we had it, to use it wisely and, for great benefit.
Yes.
I want to move on because we are going to explore this in the podcast going on, but I want to hear your story. What started you on this journey of, one, becoming a narcissistic personality disorder abuse counsellor, but who and what was the narcissist in your life, and what was your experience?
So I was the daughter of a narcissistic mother, but I didn't really understand that till I was in my early 40s, because when you grow up in a family like that, it's your norm. It's the only family you know. It's the only mother you know, the only father you know, the only family system you know. And so narcissistic parents are really good at making you feel like they love you, even though they don't show it at all. But I was my mother's favorite. And it got to a point, and this is what happens. People usually
You've got two sisters, haven't you?
Two sisters, yes. Family of 5 with 2 sisters. What usually happens, people come to me usually in their between their late 30s and maybe 60s. This is a time where people cannot take this anymore, where they've been able to just move on in their life and push forward and push forward and push forward. All of a sudden it becomes a crisis for them. And this is when they wake up to some reality. They don't know what it is, because if you don't know what the narcissistic personality disorder is, you don't know what you're looking at. All you know is,
it's not like you're taught this in school. Yeah.
Right. All you know is being around this person makes your head spin. You don't know which end is up. You lose your equilibrium. You don't understand how you can't just talk to this person, or how they can't just say simple things or answer simple questions, and you don't know how to put it all together. So there's a whole lot of odd pieces.
And you always end up feeling really crap about yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You come away from any interaction feeling guilty, blamed, shamed, confused, angry, upset, at fault.
Right. Mm-hmm. You do. You feel bad about you, because you cannot imagine that someone would be as monstrous as they
especially
truly
as
are.
Your mum, or your dad as well, a parent.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. And my mother said, I love you, I couldn't live without you, pretty much every day of my life. So
And
A real
there's the
mind
truth. She couldn't live without you because that's
couldn't live
narcissistic
without.
supply. Gosh.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah, she
There you
revealed
go.
herself. Yeah.
Yes, she did reveal herself. And she said other things throughout the years, like when she would get upset about something or depressed, I'd say, Mom, you really should go into therapy. And she, you know what she would say to me? This was really, really telling. As I look back, I see things. She would say, Randy, I'm terrified of what would be in there. I'm terrified of what I would find in there.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I thought to myself, because I knew her background and there was nothing terrifying about it. Nothing. And I'm like, what would you be so terrified by?
Something must have happened that created this false self in her, and that created that point where she hated herself so much she couldn't bear to be that person, and therefore the false self. So something must have happened. Yeah,
and I don't think it was a typical situation, because narcissistic personality disorder is something that is passed through the genes. It is genetic. So, but that just means that you have a genetic predisposition to it, meaning that under the right
breeding ground. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Under the right breeding ground. Exactly. It can develop. It doesn't mean it will, but it can. And my mother, one of the things that causes narcissistic personality disorder is humiliation, you know, it's abuse. Most of the time it's some sort of abuse. But my mother grew up in the Great Depression, along with everyone else that she knew. But somehow she felt entitled to have more. And she did not want to accept that she was in poverty, that she was very embarrassed by her family. She always dressed to the nines. She was very charismatic. She had, you know, really able to solicit. She was a piano player. She could just draw people to her. But I think that it really had to do, it was something about embarrassment or humiliation to what she saw in her own family. Now she was the only sister among, she had 4 brothers. And she was the one who had to do all the domestic stuff. But this was normal back then. Yeah. This was not anything unusual. But
there was a sense of injustice there, maybe. You know, inequality.
Yeah. She just thought, I'm better than this. That's what I believe. Because her parents were not abusive people. I knew them very well. So anyway, so I got to a point where I realized I couldn't take it. I couldn't stand my mother anymore. And then, of course, that's where the guilt comes in. You start blaming yourself. Oh, my gosh, look what this woman did for me all my life. And she loved me. And she this. And why can I not stand her? You know, I didn't want to be around her. I didn't want to hear her voice. I couldn't stand it. And I didn't know why. But without giving my age, this was before internet. And so there was no information for me. So
would you Google, though? You'd be like, my mom makes me crazy. You know, how many of us have those moments with our parents, you know?
Exactly. And there was no Google.
Yeah, exactly, you know, but even if it was there to Google, you know, what, because I think that's one of the things, and I took that from your book as well, there's nothing, you know, when you try and articulate it to somebody else that doesn't understand narcissism, it can just sound like your mom's maybe a bit needy, or they're a bit overbearing, they're a bit overcaring, or, you know, there's a bit of an unhealthy attachment style there, or, you know, it can be excused and passed off as so many other things. And you can sound a bit insensitive because you're just like, you know, you're trying to articulate and explain, you're like, yeah, when you voice it, it doesn't sound that bad, but, you know, it was more of the subtle signs. We're not talking about the, you know, the full-on abuse, but
right. You're absolutely right. We cannot talk to anybody about this that has not experienced it. Because before you realized it, you would never have imagined this could have existed. So you have to understand, people don't they don't understand it. And they'll say something like, well, your parents are getting older, so are mine. They're getting strange, they're getting more moody, they're getting quirky.
Yeah, set in their ways,
right. These
it's
are the
old
kind of
school.
things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that you hear from people. So it's so what happens is you get doubly shamed, because now you're trying to get some validation, and now people are telling you you're wrong.
Again,
and you had something to do with this. And so
reinforcing the messages that you've got from the narcissist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what happens. And this also happens often in therapy. Mm-hmm. If you go to a psychotherapist who does not specialize in this, that's the same kind of feeling you'll come away with, that something is wrong with you, that you need to do something to make this better. So I went to a therapist, and she taught me about boundaries. She recognized very clearly that I had no boundary system, taught me about that. And she said in passing to me one day, sounds like your mother's a narcissist. I thought, well, my mother never brags about herself.
Yeah, because we do have this thing, this image of what a narcissist is, somebody that's grandiosa and full of themselves and, brags. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And my mother wasn't that person. My mother was the one who said, oh, no, not me. Come on, don't fuss over me. That was my mother.
Which is the totally fuss over me.
Right, exactly. And she would be like, but then she would show me, oh, so-and-so sent me this letter. Oh, she loves me so much. And this person loves me and that person loves me. But it was never, I'm great. Yeah. It was always another way. So it took me a while to work through this. And when I finally found narcissistic personality disorder, as it is with everybody else, that was my aha moment. Oh my gosh, all the pieces fit together, all of them.
And what was it that particularly, I know you're describing, but the relationship, you said that you were the favorite one. So how did she treat you differently from the sisters? And, what was it that particularly you just started to think, this is just not a normal relationship? This is, did you start to see your friends' dynamics with their parents or their mom and just think, what, no, mine's really, not like that?
It really didn't have to do with that as much as it had to do with, so I was the favorite, but my mother was overtly abusive to everyone else in my family. So there was a huge difference between the way I was treated, the way my father was treated, and my sisters were treated. And it was torturous for me to watch this growing up as a child. And I was the family mediator from a very young age. I was put in a role to try to fix things all the time because everybody in my family was an emotional wreck. Everything went from 0 to 10.
So they couldn't regulate their emotions.
Everything. Right.
And they were getting heavily criticized, and
my sisters were being called names. They were treated, it was a very, very big difference. But what people don't understand is they think, and that my sisters did too as well, they've never been able to really shake this. They think that the golden child has it better because they are the one that's favored. But actually, the golden child doesn't fare as well in life as the scapegoat child or the ignored, invisible child, because the golden child is idealized and objectified to the point where nothing about them that's inside, nothing who they truly are, is ever recognized or admired. It's always, how can I make my mother happy? Mm-hmm. How can I look the right way so when we go out, my mother has something to brag about?
So it's always pleasing. And you fell into that role and understood, because the thing is, you fall into that role because that's the only way you get love or perceive that you get
and love. I remember a point in my life, and can't tell you what the age is, where I said to myself, I'm not going to do what my sisters do. I'm not going to go up against her. I'm just going to ride this exactly how she wants it. I remember thinking to myself that I'm just going to do it the way she wants it, so that I don't
have... you at that point?
I had to be under maybe, I guess, under 13. 12, 10, 11, something like that. I don't remember. I just remember having that aha moment where I said, I'm not going to do it the way they do it.
And that
I don't
was
want that.
a coping mechanism to think, I just want to make my life easier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't want to suffer the abuse, the criticism, the negative things that you saw your sisters experiencing.
Yes, and my father, who was emasculated every day, every single day. It was, you know, and you're like, you wanted to say, Dad, stand up for yourself, you know, but
yeah.
Never did.
Well, that's interesting, because I want to ask about your dad and the dynamic, that the role that he played within the family. Because your mum and dad, they're still together to this day, aren't they? You know, they're very
old.
Yeah.
He's 98. She's 93.
Which blows my mind, given the self-hatred. And, you know, you see it on people that have lived a life of suffering or, you know, struggles, emotional distress, and you see it, and they often die young. But that thing, what you're saying about, you know, narcissists don't suffer because they project the blame onto everybody else. So, I mean, she is walking proof that, you know, like,
and I've since discovered that they do tend to live a long time. Great. It's almost
that's not music to my ears.
It's to spite people. It's like, you know, I'm not leaving.
Oh, brilliant.
Her brothers all died from 80 and younger. Everybody in her family died young.
Gosh.
And she keeps going and there's no reason for her to keep going. Her body is she's got so many things wrong with her that she shouldn't even be walking.
Wow.
And she just keeps going. She's the Energizer bunny. She just keeps going and going. My father, what happens, this is very confusing, because I call the other parent the enabling spouse. And the reason I say that is because in a married couple, a narcissist cannot exist without an enabling spouse. They cannot do what they want to do within the family unit if the other spouse isn't supporting it, kowtowing to them, telling them they're wonderful, they're perfect. And that was what my father did. But after a certain amount of years, if the person does not get out of it, if the enabling spouse does not get out of the relationship, they merge and they become the same person. So they lose their self-identity. They don't have a self. They don't even have a soul anymore. They are completely immersed in or merged with their narcissistic spouse. And so their behaviors become very similar, which is why people say, oh, I think I have two narcissistic parents. Well, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, they're in survival mode as well. There was a quote in your book that really stood out for me, and it was, if the family was on a sinking ship, if you had a narcissistic mom, enabling father, and the three children were sinking on the ship or drowning in the sea, and everyone was drowning in the sea, the father would rescue the mother before the children. And that statement blew my mind, because I just thought, wow, like, you know, every parent's role is always protect the children at all costs, but this dynamic, it's not the case at all. It's completely changed. And I've seen that in a client that I've been working with, and they said the same. You know, they realized they had a narcissistic mum. They've completely distanced themselves now, and they've basically, you know, the father had said, okay, I can't speak to you either. And that, you know, I couldn't believe it, you know, because that's exactly what your book says. But, you know, there it played out. I mean, it is quite textbook behaviour. That's the beauty. If you understand narcissism, or sort of learn about narcissism, then actually the behaviour traits are all textbooks, so that you can preempt what the future will look like, or what's going to come up, and, you know, how to navigate around it if you can't get out of the relationship for whatever reason, whether it's work, colleagues, or siblings, or what have you. I'm conscious that time is running out. We've only got 5 more minutes, but you don't have a relationship with your mum now. Is that right? Or
right. Well, with either parent.
right.
This has been going on for about 10 years. There's limited contact and no contact. These are the ways to deal with these people. And limited contact is about setting boundaries and about really creating a relationship where they fear crossing your boundaries because there's something they have to lose. But you can only do that for so long because it's not a natural way to relate to them. And after a while,
constantly on edge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's exhausting. And after a while, they break through the barriers anyway, because they can't stay. They must be in control. You can't be the person in control. And eventually they get really, really resentful and they bust through it. And at that point, that's where you have to go, no contact. And I had to do that for my sanity, because being in, having anything to do with these people, any of my family members, made me feel crazy. And when I wasn't with them, I have a very normal, peaceful life, and I had to make a decision, them or me. And I had to choose me because nobody's going to feel the way I feel. And believe me, I've been called every name under the sun. I've been accused of everything for doing this. But that's what it comes down to. It comes down to self-love, self-protection, boundaries. You get to a point where you say, I can't do it for them anymore. I have to take care of me.
Absolutely. And I mean, that does bring up, and we will explore this more in the other podcast conversations that we have. But I mean, it brings up so many things. I mean, you're grieving a parent that hasn't passed. You're grieving a parent that has probably never been a parent. They're a narcissist. They're not a parent. You're grieving what could have been. There's guilt attached to all the, well, remember that time they were really good. Maybe that time they were acting. So, and that crazy making, thinking, have I got it wrong? I mean, there's so many times that myself and my partner have kind of questioned and went, what if we're wrong? What if we projected all this onto them, that they're a narcissist? And what if we're wrong? And then we go back and we go, well, wait a minute, they've done this, they've done that, they've done this, they've done that, and they're like, that's just not normal behavior. And we check ourselves, but we still have those moments of doubts of going, okay, especially, which we will talk about as well, hoovering techniques where they play nice and they realize the fuel supply has been cut off. So then they suddenly become all charming again and apologetic, or I'm going to change, I'm going to do this, or, whatever. And suddenly you're like, oh gosh, I've got it wrong, like being compassionate, being an empathetic human being, I'll give them another opportunity just to get sucked right back into the toxic behavior again. And being a mother yourself, you've got two children, you've got?
2 adult children, 30 and 37. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, knowing what it would be like if they cut that relationship, but, it's such a complex, challenging thing to navigate through, which is obviously why you do the work that you do, because you have to help people navigate through this and understand that actually you do need to put these healthy boundaries in, and you're not in a normal relationship. And that's one thing you said in our coaching week. You are dealing with a narcissist. You don't have a parent, you don't have a boss, you don't have a sibling, you don't have a father, you are dealing with a narcissist, and you have to separate them from that role that they are in your life.
Yes. That's real. I'm really glad you brought that up. Yes.
Yeah.
So there's so many things, there's so many tactics, there's so many reasons why we feel the way that we do. And we definitely will go into more, because I could talk about this all day, every day. But
45 minutes just isn't enough.
Yeah,
no,
I know. But I do the work because I'm equipped to do it. Not only have I lived it, not only have I studied it and researched it and written about it and worked with people, I know this, but I also, you have to be careful with who you work with, because a person who does this work must be healed, and they must have rectified all this with themselves. They cannot still be feeling angry or guilty or any of those feelings. They have to be resolved before they can work with you. And a lot of people out there doing this work are not resolved, and that gets projected onto the people who work with them. So,
and you can't heal in the environment that made you sick in the first place. And that's, if you are still having that dynamic, that relationship with the narcissist in your life, you're going to be triggered, you're going to be wounded, you're going to be harmed,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been fascinating. We will have more time for the other podcast today, with the exception we just have 45 minutes today. But highly recommend getting a copy of Randi's book, Close Encounters of the Worst Kind, the Narcissistic Abuse Survivor's Guide to Healing and Recovery.
It's in audio, digital, and paperback.
Yeah, and it's available on your website, which is randifine.com.
Right. Well, that'll just take you directly to Amazon.
All right. Okay. But also do check out your website, because you've got lots of resources there as well. And of course, if you do want to,
Right. If you go to my website, just check out the expert services, because there's something else that I do that we don't have time to talk about today. But I am certified in a particular kind of technique that very, very quickly relieves the emotional component of past traumas. So I can do that very, very quickly with you. It's a wonderful technique.
Let's talk about that. Same time next week. Randi, been an absolute pleasure. I find this topic fascinating. I'd rather I didn't. I'm not on the receiving end of it, but however, it's from a completely curious, learning, psychological perspective. It's a fascinating topic.
It is fascinating.
Yeah, no.
Okay, it's great to see you.
The more people that have an awareness of narcissism, the more we can heal the world, I think, because it's everywhere. When you start understanding it, you start seeing. And
I'm passionate about making the change. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, well, thank you again, Randi. You take care, and I'll see you same time next week.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, take care. Alrighty, bye-bye.